right. So speaking of agenda, so welcome you all. I think we see a few new faces, so we're excited to have you. Today, our education topic will be soil basics, and we'll go and we'll let Sherry do that full introduction in a moment. We'll be covering some of our chapter updates with Wigger Park, our garden tours coming up, the Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor, volunteer opportunities, as well as some of our events and activities that recently done and what are upcoming. And then we'll end with a discussion on No Mow May and how it's changed over time and how we can still continue the spirit of that mission. So without further ado, Sherry, would you like to introduce our special guest?
Yes, I would.
Oh,
am I muted? No.
oh, you're
Can you
very
hear me?
soft.
Okay, I'm not sure what's. Let me see.
I can hear you, but yes, it is a little bit soft.
Okay. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very good.
Excellent.
Okay, so yes, welcome Brianne Holman is a Sandusky native who received a Master of Science in Biological Science from Wright State University. Her formal background is in plant ecology and with research related to invasive species impacts and control. At the Erie County Conservation District, she is a grant writer and project manager for watershed improvement projects to reduce sediment and nutrient pollutants. She also coordinates a volunteer stream monitoring program and volunteer cleanup and restoration activities. As a watershed coordinator of mainly agricultural watersheds, she has assisted local farmers with conservation education, data collection, and transitioning through land stewardship changes. And she also has other topics to speak on. But we're looking forward to her talk about soil basics, knowing more about your soil set up for a successful garden. So without further ado.
All right, welcome. All right. So Brian, I'm gonna stop sharing and transfer control over to you. And I see that you just unmuted yourself. So give me 1 second.
Let's see.
All right. Gonna switch it over to you. And then just once you're done, please switch back.
Switch it back. Okay. Let's see if, can everybody see this okay? Because when I share, I think I lose the ability to see everyone.
Yes, we can see.
Yes. Okay, great. So, I see it's cut off a little bit. Hopefully this won't be too bad on most of the slides. So, again, thank you, Sherry and everyone for inviting me tonight. It's actually kind of interesting because my whole background has always been in plants and watersheds and things like that. But working at a local conservation district has completely changed my entire outlook on soil and really why we need to have a better appreciation for it and understand it a little bit better, because it's really the basis of everything we try to do, whether it's trying to improve Lake Erie or whether it's trying to increase pollinator habitat or restore forests or anything like that. It really all starts with the soil. So I'm just going to talk about just our very first kind of subtitle for this. It's kind of this common joke we always say around our office is that the biggest problem with soil is everybody treats it like dirt. So I forgot that Sherry was going to give a little background, so I'll just kind of go over this. I've been with the district for about 17 years. Like I said, started off doing mainly watershed work. I still do that. But now a lot of the work I do is related to soil health improvement and working more specifically with agricultural ground. And I just want to kind of go over, lots of times when people think about soil, they just think that it's just kind of this inert material that we plant plants in and everything's just all fine. But when you really get down to it, soil actually provides so many essential functions for us. And really the difference between whether or not a soil is a benefit to us or if it's something that really causes harm to us, and when you think about Lake Erie, think about all the dredging we have to do because of all that soil that washes out into Lake Erie, all those nutrients that gets carried along with, the soil and just with the water itself. And it causes lots of problems and that we have to deal with. But if we have a healthy soil, we're actually going to receive more benefits from that. So this slide here just kind of shows, healthy soils are essential for food security and food production. Most people don't even realize that a quarter of all of the plant's biodiversity is actually found in the soils. And one thing that we always like to share is that there are more microorganisms in 1 teaspoon of soil than there are all the people on this earth. So it's really this overlooked ecosystem that we walk on every single day, and we really don't give that much appreciation for. The soil itself, when it's healthy, is really helping us to combat climate change. And obviously on the reverse, the more we destroy our soil, the more we're releasing a lot of that carbon back out into the atmosphere. And if you're really big into a lot of the watershed and stormwater management type of worlds, when we have healthy soils, those soils can actually act as sponges. And so we can actually get a lot of water quality volume stored in our soils. And we can also use those soils to be a filter as well. One snowy December, which probably was a long time ago. I can't think of the last time we've had a really snowy December. But my boss and I, he's a civil engineer, we actually sat down and calculated the current organic matter rates of an entire watershed. We then basically said through agricultural conservation, if we could raise the soil organic matter by just as little as 1%. And I'll kind of go over soil organic matter in a minute. But what we actually found was that if you could just raise that soil 1% of organic matter on 50% of the row crop fields in that watershed, we could actually reduce that 40% reduction of phosphorus that was entering Lake Erie. So I think there's a lot of potential for us to really improve our soils, which will eventually improve everything else that we do. And I think a lot of it just starts with the awareness. So first, exactly what is soil? So depending on what dictionary you pull up, sometimes soil definitions are just something very simple as the stuff that covers the earth and covers the earth's surface. When you really look at an accurate description of soil, we're talking about something that's biologically active, and it's also a media that's used to grow living plants. In that media, what we're really talking about is the minerals, the organic matter, and then air and water. Now, this is something that really kind of surprised me about soil is if you look at soil itself, like if you were to pick up a handful of soil and you're looking at something that's healthy, that handful of soil, about 45% of what's in your hand is going to be broken down minerals. About 5% of what's in your hand is mostly going to be organic material. So these are kind of dead plants, roots, maybe even dead animals that have worked their way into the soil mixture. What was surprising to me was that 50% of what you're holding in your hand is really this exchange between air and water space. And so soil particles will actually form together and kind of create this really, really porous material that if it becomes fully saturated, that 50% mainly turns towards water. And as the soil bed starts to kind of dry out, that water then, evaporates out and gets replaced with airspace. Now, why this is so important is because I think it's our misunderstanding that soil should always be about 50% air and water space. When we don't try to consider what that means and why that's valuable to us, that's the part of soil that we damage the most. So another just kind of little tidbit is, what is soil not? And soil is not dirt. Dirt is something you sweep up. When soil is referred to as dirt, us conservationists think, okay, that's a dead soil. That's when you've damaged your soil to the point that now it's starting to turn into desert. It can no longer support life, or it can support very, very little life. Potting mix. I hear people say potting soil all the time. There is no such thing called potting soil. It's actually called potting mix. And the reason why it's potting mix is because what it's missing is the biological component of soil. So potting mix, when they actually develop it, they sterilize it. And so there are no microbes in it, or at least when you buy it from the store, that product has been man-made, and it might have compost in it, and it might have vermiculite, perlite, things like that to try to keep that air and water space open. But because it's missing the biological component, it's not true soil. And that's why you can't take soil and put it in a pot, because if you put it in the pot, you disconnect it from the ecosystem around it, and it'll compress over time. So potting mix, again, it's missing that living component, and so it's not actually soil. I've also had a lot of people say that compost is soil. Now, compost is a component of soil, but it in alone is not its own soil. It's basically just the broken down plant matter. And remember what I said before, 45% is mineral. So you have to have broken down rocks and things like that build into that soil mixture. So how does soil get damaged? Well, typically in our backyards and in our garden, it's usually caused by us. If you continually walk on the same path, or if you drive along a path, or sometimes even you might notice the sides of your driveways. If you've ever driven slightly off your driveway, you're going to have these areas where the vegetation begins to stop growing because the soil has become so tight and compacted that nothing's there. Once you start to lose that vegetation, you're really losing that main biological component that keeps that soil alive. And so the soil itself starts to then begin to deplete. The other most common thing that we do is we love to move soil around. We love to till it. We love to push it around. We like to mound it over here. We like to smooth it over there. And so it's the act of that disturbance that we're always doing to our soil that unfortunately is breaking up all of that carbon, and it's sending that carbon, it's causing it to really oxidize and go back out into the atmosphere. On one bonus side of it, usually when we till, we're kind of releasing nutrients, it's a short little burst. The problem is over time, we're causing a lot of damage to the soil. And if we're not doing anything to try to repair that, eventually you're going to wind up with a pretty depleted soil in the end. So just kind of a look again at that little pie chart of what happens when we damage soil versus when we leave soil healthy. So imagine your pollinator bed. Your pollinator bed would be the healthy soil that's on the right-hand side here. You've got that 50% air and water space. This one actually has closer to 70% air and water space. You have very, very solid aggregates, which basically refers to the soil itself, the particles sticking together to create those tiny little niches where the water and the air can kind of move in and out of. So if you imagine, this is like a nice damp sponge that's ready to have water poured on it, and it's going to get everything soaked up into it. Now, when we destroy soil through tillage, through compacting, through driving on it, whatever it is that we're doing to it, what we're doing is we're smashing all of those spaces, all that air and that water space. We're smashing everything together so that when you pick it up, the soil itself feels much denser. It's very heavy. And it's mainly just the mineral component of soil. This is what makes roots extremely hard to penetrate. And so you have a really hard time getting some of your plants to start growing. That's why lots of times people will till the soil before they plant. Not necessarily a bad practice. If you're going to till a soil that's very, very tight and very dense before you plant a bunch of perennial plants, eventually you're kind of aerating that soil a little bit to get those plants in there, but then you're making sure that you have a living plant that can fill that space out and kind of act as rebar. Now, if you're doing that just in your vegetable garden and then you're not putting any plants, and I'm going to show you guys some pictures in the future, if you're not putting any plants on there after your annual crop is gone, there's nothing to hold that soil up. So every time it rains, you're going to continue to press those soil particles together. Even worse, if you've ever heard somebody say, never walk on your soil when it's wet, the reason why you never do that is because a wet soil is way more susceptible to this compaction of you pushing the particles closer together. So what does this kind of look like out in your yard? You can see on the right-hand side is a healthy soil. You can see lots of worms. The soil itself looks a little bit looser and kind of fluffier. The soil on the left here is the one that's been fully compacted down. And so sometimes if you were to dig into your gardens or even just into your lawn, if it's an area where you're constantly doing a lot of traffic, you may even notice that the soil will peel apart like plates sitting on top of each other. That's a pretty good sign of significant compaction. And obviously, when you have compaction, you don't have good water movement. So you might start to see ponding and things like that are happening. So this is a very easy test. I love doing this test. I love doing this with farmers, with students, with just the general public. This is something called a slake test, and this is something you can do at your own home. So this is basically just 2 glasses of water. We fill the water all the way up to the top. You put just a little wire basket or something to hold a small chunk of soil in. And if your soil is healthy and has that good aggregate stability and it hasn't been compressed and compacted and lost organic matter, you can actually put that soil ped in the water and it's going to show up like that left-hand column there where you can see the water's really nice and clear. Now you may see some of the soil has kind of fallen off that ped a little bit as you've submerged it in water, but the water stays relatively clear. This is really what we're shooting for. Whether you're a farmer, a contractor, or even just a gardener in your own backyard, if everyone cared for the soil that they actually have control of, we wouldn't really have a whole lot of streams running completely brown every single time it rains. Now, the column on the right, again, this is a very, very depleted soil. And what happens is this soil has been so compact that it can't even barely grow the plants on it and doesn't have plants growing on it most of the time throughout the year. So plants itself really produce the glues that hold all these soil particles together. So when you don't have perennial plants, or if you don't constantly keep planting something on there, even in between your annual plants, that soil itself will just slowly start to decompose and you'll lose that glue. And so when it's subjected to water, now this is obviously being fully submerged, but even if it were to be raindrops hitting the water, the soil just can't hold itself together. So when you start seeing streams, notice some of them, if some streams run way browner than other streams, it's probably because there's poorer soil practices happening in that watershed as opposed to another watershed. And what I can tell you is that the soils in America, we have damaged them pretty significantly just in the last 100 years. Currently, they say that we've lost more than 50% of our organic matter in just the last 50 years. And most of the soil organic matter rates, at least in Erie County, are around 2%. Most of our soils should be really around 4 to 5%. So it's something that's happened here. It's something that's happened all over our nation and then even the globe as well. All right, so I'm kind of giving you at least a little bit of the why. We want healthy soil because it needs to do lots of different things for us. I want to dive just a little bit into, how do we really evaluate soil and what do these things mean when you're trying to grow plants? So soil, we consider the properties to be either physical, chemical, or biological. I'll tell you that with modern agriculture, physical and chemical properties has been where all the research has been for the last, 100 years or so, probably greater than 100 years. And really this biological piece is just really being cracked open in the last 50 years. There's a lot of things we still don't know, but there's a lot of things that we've really learned. And we're realizing that if you ignore the biological aspects of soil, the whole system is really going to fall apart. So I've got a star there in the center. When you have all 3 of these in balance, that's kind of that sweet spot of soil health where you're going to get optimum function out of your soil type. So let's first talk about some of the physical characteristics. Soil is comprised, that mineral component is usually going to be comprised of either a sand, a silt, and a clay. If you ever want to figure out what type of soil you're dealing with, you can always call your local conservation district. We actually have access to different types of soil maps. We can tell you probably more than you ever wanted to know about what type of soil you have on your property. If you're more of a DIYer and you like to experiment on your own, do something simple as take a peanut butter jar or a pickle jar, take a shovel, small like spade shovel full of soil, put it in the jar, put some water in it, give it a really good shake, and then just let it sit for 24 hours. What's going to happen is the sand, silt, and clay is going to settle into that jar based off of its density. So sand is much heavier. It's going to fall first, followed by silt, and then followed by clay, which is the lightest. That's the one that's usually going to stay suspended in the water column for the longest. Why this is important is because if you have sandy soil, you're probably going to have pretty high infiltration. You know, basically water's always going to go through there. However, the plants you're picking are probably going to have to be more drought resistant, or you're probably going to have to water them a little bit more to keep them alive. If you've got a heavy clay soil, you might actually find that you have pretty poor water infiltration. And so you may have to pick certain plants that are that don't mind having wet feet, you know, maybe are a little bit more of like the wetland type of variety. Maybe they're even more river basin or floodplain types of plants. And then the silts are also kind of a relatively tight soil as well. Now, if you're trying to change your soil type, with sandy soils, we always recommend compost to try to help build the organic matter in the sand. It kind of helps that water retention value. If you're dealing with a clay soil, a lot of people say, oh, add sand. Absolutely don't do that. You'll make concrete. But again, compost. In this case, we would probably use probably a rougher leaf compost to really help break some of those clay particles back up. Again, both sand, silt, and clay, all of them can compact. So you can actually change those compaction rates of these soils. And so it's not just what soil type you have, but it's the condition and it's the type of stewardship that you're doing with them that really makes a big difference. My soil in my own backyard is what's known as a Delray silt clay. So essentially that means that I have a silt layer mixed within my topsoil. And as I start to dig down a little bit greater than, I think it's about 8 inches, it turns into straight up potter's clay. Through cover crops, compost amendments, and I have some chickens as well that love to hang out in my garden. I've completely transformed my garden soil and my flower bed soil. And when I can actually take shovel scoops out of the different areas, they almost look like absolutely different soil types. So how you treat your soil really can make a big difference to the overall health of your garden and your pollinators. Oh, looks like I've copied this again. Sorry about that. We're going to move through this really quick. Okay, so let's get to the chemical components of soil. When we refer to chemical, what we're talking about is, you know, the big 3 for growing plants: the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium. We're also think a lot about the micronutrients that are also really important for our soil as well. And so you may have talked to a gardener that says, hey, you know, we're always trying to shoot for somewhere between like a low 6 and a high 6, you know, for an optimal pH for my soil. I get a lot of calls about blossom bottom rot, and I get a lot of comments of people saying, well, I've put more calcium in my garden. I've crushed up more eggshells. Our soils in Northern Ohio, generally speaking, have a very, very high level of calcium naturally in them. So it's often not a calcium problem in our soil. It's often a pH issue in our soil. With the stop of with the Clean Air Act and the stop of some of the nitrous gases and sulfuric gases that were going out into the atmosphere, we no longer get the acid rain that we used to get. And so our soils tend to be very, very alkaline, which means that they're going to be a slightly higher than a 7 on the pH scale. If you look at this scale and you go from 7 straight up, you can see that a lot of our nutrients are readily available at 7 and then down to about that mid 6. That's kind of that optimum zone that everybody's always shooting for. What we've actually been seeing is that rainfall back before the Clean Water Act, or excuse me, the Clean Air Act was around about a 4.2 to a 4.5 pH, so an acid rain because it's on that lower end of the scale. Today, we're actually seeing that our rainfall is actually close to neutral. It's very, very close to 7. And so we're now starting to see our soils are starting to creep up a little bit higher in pH. And so that might need to be adjusted. The way that we adjust pH in our soil If our soil is too alkaline, meaning the number is higher than 7, or in our case for gardening, if it's anything higher than about a 6.8, we're going to add some elemental sulfur to try to bring that back down. If our soil starts to become a little bit too acidic, we're usually going to add some type of calcium carbonate or something like that, or lime, something like lime, to try to bring that back up. You might notice that the farm field sometimes will get those big kind of grayish piles. Those are lime piles. So that tells you that, hey, that soil type was starting to get a little bit too acidic, and that's most likely due to the fertilizers they put on there. And so they're trying to neutralize some of that. Probably a big thing. I know you guys are all really big into pollinating gardens and native plants and things like that. For the vegetable growers in the room, if you get blossom bottom rot on your tomatoes, and obviously you're not going to figure that out until about mid-season, there is nothing you can do to correct the pH mid-season. You're going to have to add your calcium with a foliar spray. And you can simply do that by crushing up some calcium tabs, dissolving them in water, and just spraying that onto your plants. Don't overspray them. Spray them at night. That's going to get that calcium back into that plant. Unfortunately, the pH issue takes several months to correct. So if you get that blossom bottom rot, you're going to want to add that sulfur at the end of your growing season so that you can correct it for the next growing season. Okay, so the biological. So I'm hoping this just makes everybody happy looking at this. A lot of people don't really realize that the soil ecosystem itself is both above and below the ground. There's lots and lots of things that are going on. And really, it's this exchange of all the biology and all of the energy back and forth amongst all these organisms, which is what keeps soil alive. This is why if you take soil and put it into a pot, you no longer have this big full system anymore. And so the soil itself begins to start dying. So if you've never heard of the rhizosphere, it's probably one of the coolest things I've ever learned in biology. The rhizosphere refers to this very, very thin plane that actually wraps around every root hair of every plant in the soil. This is actually the only spot where all the exchange takes place in the soil to the plant. The plants generally will not they do not pull a lot of nutrients towards them. They usually use other types of organisms like mycorrhiza fungus, maybe even some of the nematodes and some of the bacteria to really help to pull these nutrients towards them. But all the magic, all the chemistry, all the bioexchange that's actually taking place in the soil happens on this very, very small plane called the rhizosphere. And if you can see, it's as small as just the cell membrane itself. And so if you don't have these living roots, there's this idea that, hey, there is so much soil out there, but for every bare spot of soil, there is nothing happening in that soil. And if there's nothing happening and there's no exchange happening, then that soil could essentially be on its way of decline. This is why it's so important that we always have soil covered with some type of living plant. I'm sure you guys already know this. Lots of our perennial plants, they go dormant, but they definitely are not dead, right? So those roots are still interacting with the soil and they're helping to feed the soil. Something that I learned through working with agriculture and learning more about nutrient dynamics in agricultural land, we don't feed plants. All nutrients actually have to go through the soil microbiome to get to the plant. So we must feed the soil must feed the plant. If our soil isn't healthy, the nutrients we place there actually have a higher likelihood of leaving the system than they do going into the plant that we're applying it for. And I think this is what's starting to happen a lot in our agricultural ground. We've kind of turned our back a little bit on what the soil needs are, and we've left now the soil to start to begin to decline, and it can no longer function the way that we need it to. All right, so how can you guys care for your soil at home? Probably the best thing that we can do is we can look to see, well, what does nature do when soil is disturbed? There is the wonderful dandelion. Whether you love it or hate it, it is literally what's considered as one of nature's medics. If you've never read the book Teeth of the Lion by Anita Sanchez, I highly recommend it. It's the story of how the dandelion went from the most beloved plant in America to the most despised. And what's interesting about the dandelion and many of the plants that we consider weeds, these are, again, in this book they call them the pioneer species or the medics. If you can imagine, everything that we do that's really against nature is almost like a battle or a war zone. And once the war's over, you send the medics out to try to heal the wounded, right? So what nature does with plants is it sends a lot of these so-called weeds to try to heal a problem that they've actually found. And unfortunately, most of those problems are caused by us. My husband hates that slide because he wants to get rid of all the dandelions in my yard. And I'm just like, hey, it's telling us what's going on. So one of the things that you can do is you can start to read your weeds a little bit. So dandelions, clover, crabgrass, plantain, chicory, all of those types of plants are showing you where your soil is being compacted. You're going to find these plants right along the edges of sidewalks. You're going to find them mostly along the sides of your driveway, especially in that spot where you went off the sideway, or went off the driveway just a little bit. You're going to find them in your walk paths. You're also going to find them anytime that you have exposed soil. These are the fastest plants that are going to move in and to try to cover that soil as much as possible. Believe it or not, soil doesn't want to be naked just as much as you do. So nature is going to try to clothe it with something. And these are some of the fastest growers that nature has in its arsenal to really help to solve the problem. Wild carrot and yarrows. These are two species that just absolutely do not need very many nutrients and can grow straight out of concrete almost, it seems like. So when you start to see lots of wild carrot and yarrow, you're really looking at a soil that is very depleted and potentially has some compaction layers in it as well. Now, on the flip side, if you see things like moss, violet, ground ivy, this is telling you that your soil is very poorly draining. And now there's two things that can kind of happen with this. Number one, it could be just your soil type. We do have several soil types that just are considered poorly draining soils. They have very, very high clay contents in them. But again, it can also be another sign that you've had a poorly draining soil. You're now starting to compact it because maybe you're still walking on that soil when it's wet, and the plants themselves are sitting there trying to heal it. So biggest four principles, we always try to say, do not disturb, keep your soil covered, try to mix up what's growing on your soil, and for God's sakes, try to keep living roots at all times. So what does this really look like in practice? Well, do not disturb. If you're somebody who likes to garden, rather than tilling the entire garden bed up, maybe try to make some dedicated beds and try to reduce the amount of tillage that you do. I've changed in my own flower beds, my pollinator gardens. When I add new stuff, I literally only disturb the soil right where I'm getting ready to plant that plant. I try to minimize things as much as possible. The next biggest thing is cover and provide some type of armor. You can do this temporarily through mulch. Again, when you make dedicated beds, you're really kind of exposing very small sections of soil, so it makes it easier for you to cover them temporarily. Companion planting is a wonderful thing to do. Not only does it help to benefit the plants, it can either keep pests away, or it can help to attract different types of pollinators. And again, it covers the soil around the plants that you're trying to grow. And then one other thing that I think, again, here's a funny thing that my husband and I kind of argue about, but leave the leaves at the end of the year. Not only do those leaves provide extra organic matter to eventually work their way back into the soil as they decompose, but it's important pollinator habitat too. And it's also providing that cover for the soil through the winter months, because the colder soil gets, the hotter soil gets, that microbiome has kind of a sweet spot it likes to live in too. And so you can really shut down the biology if you're not keeping soil covered. Another thing, mix it up. Additions of compost are always wonderful to the soil. They kind of especially if you're someone who does periodically do some disturbance, it's a great way to kind of add what's getting lost. If you are planting any types of gardens, whether they're pollinator gardens using perennials, or if you're doing annual vegetable gardens, it's important to try to mix up the diversity as much as possible, whether you're doing it with annual rotations or if you're just doing a giant grab bag of lots of different types of plants all at once. If you think about it, things in the soil are not, some of them are specialized organisms. And so if you're not providing that food, or remember what I said, the plants keep the soil alive. So if you're not feeding the soil and if you're not feeding that whole ecosystem, again, you're really starting to damage the system rather than helping it. And then using livestock if you can. I mean, if you don't have cows, maybe chickens might work. If you don't have chickens, that's okay. Maybe just add some compost once in a while. And then again, last but not least, living roots and why this is so important. Soil needs to be fed throughout the entire year. And what we normally find is that people will work on on their gardens, whether they're planting annual flowers or whether they're doing vegetables. And then once everything is harvested and everything's gone, they just let the garden sit. Well, up here in Northern Ohio, we've got maybe 5 really good months of growth. And then we've got most of the year where really nothing's growing. Well, that's a pretty long time to try to sustain that microbiome and really keep it active. So if you actually provide something known as a cover crop, whether you're doing raised beds, whether you're doing dedicated beds, or even I don't currently have, I'm actually starting dedicated beds right now in my garden, but I cover crop everything. I try to just make sure that there is never more than just a few weeks that my soil is left without some type of living root in it. Because again, I know that rhizosphere is so important, and I need to try to make sure that there is so much rhizosphere surface area to keep my soil biologically active. So hopefully I'm still within 20 minutes, but I just kind of want to give you guys a big reminder. Soil is a living skin of the earth. It's not just this inert material that we plant in. When it's healthy, it provides us so many benefits beyond just growing vegetables. When we do disturb our soil, we are actively injuring it. So we have to try to think about the things that we're doing and try to minimize those, or at least try to correct them as much as possible. And again, there's lots of good stewardship practices you can do out there. And unfortunately, we've got a long way to go. Our soils are not in the most horrible condition, but I haven't run into a soil yet that couldn't use a little bit more improving. And that's it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think I see a question or two in the chat. Do you see that, Brianne? Or do you want
Sorry,
me
I'm trying to get out of sharing mode right now,
Okay.
and it's taking its time.
Right. Well, that's going on. And then once you could transfer that back to me, I believe Jane in our audience asked, what is the name of the test with the water glasses?
It's called the Slake test. It's SLAKE. And there are tons of YouTube videos on it if you want to actually see one of them in action.
Thank you. And I see another question on here is, what's a cover crop for gardens?
So probably the most cover crop, or the most common cover crop species, both for gardens and for larger scale agriculture, is cereal rye. So the 2 photos that I had in there, the one that was in the ground was a cereal rye. The one that was in those raised beds was actually a vetch, not crown vetch, not the invasive one. I think it was a hairy vetch that was in there. Clovers are a great cover crop. One of the things I'm going to start experimenting in my own garden is I'm going to do clover in between my rows now to provide nitrogen for my garden plants. I'm actually also taking a set of my lawn, and I'm trying to transition it right now to a clover lawn as opposed to having just the regular turf grass. But cereal rye is a great one. What's nice about it is you can plant it as late as mid-November, and it does really, really well. So if you're trying to stretch your garden out a little bit, it's something that you can plant a little bit later. Some of the other cover crops are things like buckwheat, oats, radishes, and things like that. Some of those don't actually last all winter long. So lots of times we'll recommend different types of mixes and things like that. So
Any good options that are native to our area?
so with the cover crops, that's a good question. I'm not sure how many of them are native to the area. These ones are not meant to survive for very long. So, like my cover crop right now, my rye, I'll actually be terminating it here in about the next week, and it's very easy to terminate. I actually take a piece of angle iron on a 2x4, and I have a rope on it, and I literally just stomp and crimp it down, and then it provides excellent cover that helps to reduce weeds and things like that. The other nice thing about cereal rye is it provides an allelopathic effect. So I have less weeds in my garden, and if you can have less weeds, and this is the same thing with farmers, if they have less weeds to kill, they're going to use less herbicides overall. And so we're trying to get them to use plants to combat plants rather than chemicals always to combat things.
Fair enough. Any other questions from the group?
I have a question. And I do a community garden, and one of the ways we have this horrible weed that just comes in the garden always, and we've been using just plain cardboard. Is that a terrible idea? Like now I'm starting to feel, have I been killing those?
No, and
friends in the
actually,
soil.
yeah. So I use cardboard in mine too. I use cardboard in my walk
Okay.
areas and stuff too. So, so you can smother plants and you can shade them out to kill them rather than using herbicides to kill them, and that's completely fine. What I almost have, well, I've been hearing this from a lot of soil scientists. What you maybe shouldn't do is the black tarp that people have been putting on. The problem with and I've had people that they don't want to kill off weeds in their garden, so they'll put a black tarp down for the first month to try to burn off all the plants, with heat. The problem is that black tarp actually heats the soil, and then you wind up killing the upper inches of the entire microbiome as well too. I mean, it will eventually come back, but cardboard's much better.
So it's okay to use then.
Yes.
It's not like this. Okay, great.
No, cardboard's good to use. What I would worry about with cardboard is anytime that you're adding carbon to the soil. So if you're using straw mulch, if you're using cardboard, anything like that that's heavy on carbon and not any nitrogen, you usually have to offset and add a little bit of nitrogen, because as that starts to decompose, it actually has the ability to pull the nitrogen out of the soil and away from the plants you're trying to grow.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Does the rye actually add nutrients to the soils, or just a protection from erosion and loss?
So it's more of a scavenger of nutrients more than something that adds to them. So typically you put, and this is why we try to make farmers use it quite a bit. So if there's any leftover nutrients in their field, we want them to put the rye on there, because it's gonna cover the soil, it's gonna keep it alive, it'll scavenge nutrients, and it'll stop erosion. It'll do all those things for them.
Okay, got
when
it.
you kill the rye in the spring, it takes about a month or so after the rye has been terminated for it to then release the nutrients it scavenged. So when farmers are planting corn, they'll be terminating their rye, and then when corn begins to start to seed set, that's when the rye is releasing the nitrogen, and it's a good time for it to be releasing at that point, because it's that last final push for that plant. So now there are, if you're wanting to increase fertility, you want to move more to legumes, so peas, clovers, things like that, because those are the nitrogen fixing ones, and they'll actually add nitrogen to the soil.
But they're not going to last through the winter.
So winter peas last through the winter, clovers last through the winter. There's a beautiful pollinator clover right now. If you guys have driven around and seen any farm fields that have these really long, beautiful, dark red blooms on them, that's a type of clover called crimson clover. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's a huge nitrogen producer. And so some of those farmers are actually using crimson clover as kind of a start added nitrogen to their farm so that they don't have to buy additional nutrients that apply and potentially use it in a storm. So
Good to know. Thank you.
well, thanks. I can talk about soil all day. I think I definitely went way over in my time. But I hope you guys got just a little bit different appreciation for it. Like I said, when I first started, I always thought I'd be the water of soil and water. I never thought I would be so excited about soil. Now I can never stop talking about soil. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful.
You've given me a lot to think about.
Yes.
It's
Thank
all
you.
checks and balances.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure our team might have a few more questions for you, so we'll be sure to send them your way if there's some additional follow-up questions there. So
Wonderful.
Thank you, Bree.
again so much.
And don't hesitate to reach out to your local soil and water conservation districts. They can actually give you detailed soil reports about what you have on your property. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
thanks.
You. All right, so let's get back to sharing. So give me 1 second. All right. All right. So, all right. So welcome back, guys. I'm sure that was a great educational topic. I know just even from some private messages going back and forth, I think there are some more questions about like, what about like old places that had old pine trees and what to do with black walnut after a black walnut's been removed, or in my case, my tree fell in my house. So, we'll be curious to hear more of those answers on soil amendments. But last month, or over the last month, we've had 12 new members join our team. So please, if anybody's new, please, we're excited to have you and welcome. And if you know friends or family that would be interested in this topic, please don't hesitate to share, about our organization, because we are a volunteer nonprofit. I'm excited to say, as of today, we have 149 members, so close to 150. But welcome. All right, next. So special projects. So Betsy, I believe you're still on the line, correct?
I am. Hello.
Hello. Would you like to share a little bit about your project?
Sure. So my name is Betsy Jarvie, and I am in the. I'll just do a quick plug for the pollinator steward certification too. So I'm doing a pollinator steward certification, and you do an online class. It's about 9 or 10 hours, and then after you complete the class, you of course talk about what you learned. But a second requirement is to do some kind of active service. And that's either taking over a garden, starting a garden, doing some kind of educational outreach. And so what I did was I reached out to my local Keep Lakewood Beautiful organization, of which, by the way, Jessica, I was accepted onto the board last night. So now I'm on the board.
Congratulations. How exciting.
Yeah. I was like, wow, whew, more plant things.
But we're happy to help you with that.
Yes. So no, I'm thrilled. And so, but I reached out to them and asked about the possibility of taking over an adoptive spot and turning it into a pollinator garden. So wonderfully enough, they offered me Wager Park. And some really positives about Wager Park is one, it is very, very visible. It's on the corner of Madison and Hilliard in Lakewood, Ohio. So it gets a ton of traffic. It's a very popular park with families. And so it's really got high visibility. The other really nice thing about it is that most of it already has really good established native plants. There's 2 species that aren't native, and unfortunately they planted about 40 of each. that I would like to eventually remove. They're not terrible. It's not like they're these horrible invasive things, but I really want to turn this into a 100% native pollinator garden. So I am going to be asking for assistance in starting to pull those. But I've already cleaned up the garden a lot. And Jessica, that's on the second slide. I just, I took some additional pictures. So I've done a lot of cleaning. I'm going to be having, so you can see in that first picture, there's some of that sedum, but there's also like that little bunny grass. That's not a native. It's belongs in Asia or Africa, which is certainly not Lakewood, Ohio. And so that's one of the things I want to get away from. And I should be getting some mulch the first week of June. They're being a little, so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have a day where we can get a group of people to come out, continue to do some weeding, maybe start pulling some of those plants and giving that place a really good mulch. And now that I've heard all about the soil, I'm super freaked out about it because like there's bare patches of soil and I'm like, oh no, I'm like sitting here not doing anything and my soil is dying possibly. So as soon as I can get that, I'd really like to get that mulch on. So that's my update.
Wonderful.
Nice.
So we're really excited to work with Betsy on this. So she's been wonderful in communicating this project or initiative with us. So we'll be working very closely with Betsy to schedule out like a prep day and then probably installation day. But obviously we're part of that's a contingent upon the city piece as well. So Betsy, anything else you want to add?
Just that I would love some feedback on maybe what I can put there instead. As you can see, they really had a beautiful design. And I am a very laissez-faire gardener. I don't think so much about things. I just put them where I think they should go. So I would certainly love some assistance because I really want to make sure that this is, spectacularly designed. So it really drives home how beautiful native plants can be. So,
well, Betsy, we'll definitely be putting you in touch with some of our designers, and I know at least one or two of them are on the phone, or sorry, on the call today. So, definitely happy to help you with that.
great.
All right, and thank you again for taking the lead on this and setting an example. So it's a great example of just how you can make it a change in your community. And just adopting a spot like this and improving upon it. So
yeah, I mean, I really thought they were going to give me like a little 2x5 place like by Kaufman Park sign or something. Instead, they're like, no, have this beautiful place, and I was like, wow, okay.
it is definitely front and center as well.
Yes.
So
Yep.
we're very excited about that. So thank you. All right. Well, and another Betsy project. So Betsy has been kind enough to volunteer and help head up our garden tours for our members. So for those of you that are just new or just saw our most recent newsletter go out at the beginning of the month, we are starting to do a call to offer up homes that are interested in doing garden tours towards late summer. We're still working on that, but Betsy, would you like to speak on that piece?
Yes. So Janice sent me a really cool presentation from another local Wild Ones chapter based in Pennsylvania. And what they do is anyone who would like to show their gardens, you just set up a time and it's short. We're not asking you to be out there, from 8 to 5 talking to people. The idea is to just have a couple hours on the day of your choosing. And we'd love to know what's in your yard so we can just give a nice blurb about what you're doing, what your hopes and dreams are for your yard, if you're seeing any kinds of special pollinators in your yard, are you getting a lot more birds, those types of things. I would love to know that. And so we do have a few, Jessica, that have already reached out, so I'll be reaching out to them. And I'm happy to take the lead and do the first one. Because especially if we want to do it towards the end of summer, I would like to open up my yard on, I think it's July 20th, because Lakewood Garden Walk is the next day.
Yes.
So I would
Thank you
have
for being one
everyone
of the
over.
first to volunteer for that.
Yes. So I'd have everyone over. We could look at my yard, and then we could also walk up to my adopt a spot and look at the adopt a spot, because it's like up the street and 1 block over. So it's very close to my house.
Wonderful.
So those of you who have reached out, you'll be hearing from me to start planning this. And I do encourage everyone to do it. No one's coming to criticize or be like, wow, we're all coming to see. It gives me hope to see what everyone else is doing, whether you have 1 bed or 15, like to just come and see someone's yard that they're doing stuff, I think is amazing. So I hope people won't be shy or dismissive of the hard work that they're doing, because we will all appreciate it.
Yes, and Betsy, thank you for expounding upon that, because that's exactly what we're going for. This is about progress, not perfection. And sometimes even seeing that in progress, whether you're just starting out or you feel your yard is really messy because you're in that transition phase, or you have a well-established garden, but especially those first 2, sometimes that helps people to feel like, oh, it's okay to share my story and my progress, because it helps inspire people like, oh, it's not just me, because, I know we have some professional landscape artists in this group, right?
Which I can assure you, I am not.
Yeah, mine is not either. Don't be wrong. When it's cleaned up, it's nice, but right now it's just a little rough on certain areas.
Yeah.
So no judgment. So
Mm-mm.
please feel free to if you are even interested in this at all, please send us an email at wildonesgreatercleveland.com, or sorry, at gmail.com. And Betsy will be rounding up those requests and getting back to you to schedule that out. So we're really excited, because this will be the first year that we are doing this. So thank you. All right. Next, so for those that don't know, we launched our Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor just the other week. So keep in mind, so many of these way stations or some of these signs have a certification that comes with this. This is meant for anyone, whether you have 3 plants that you're starting off with in a dirt patch, or you have over 100 native plants in your yard. And this is a way to bring people together, let your neighbors know what you're doing. And it's a beautiful sign designed by local artist Jeff Santala. Getting on the map is free. So if you haven't already done that, please do so. We'd love to see your gardens. Like I said, doesn't matter if it's dirt patch with 3 plants or more. We'd just love to see that and the progress and the steps that we're taking for this. And also, like I said, we have this beautiful sign that is available for $25 plus tax. And the funds for this allow us to do more educational events and activities, and keeping them free and open to the public. And also, as we do community projects and gardens, it'll help with the funds with regards to those projects and initiatives as well. And then invite a friend. Like I said, getting on the map is free, so that it's easy peasy. It only takes a few minutes to fill out. The link is there, and if somebody could be so kind as to get the link and put it in the chat for those on the call, I'd really appreciate it. But like I said, please spread the word, and also how to get a sign. So we are currently not offering it online. We are offering it at many of our events. If you're not sure, ask us. Example, one of the next ones that we will have the signs at is the upcoming Summit Metro Parks Native Plants Festival. We just had it at all of 5 locations of the Cleveland Metro Parks plant sale. I believe Ray had it at some of his events. So we'll have more of them, and we'll probably even set up in the next month or so a special day and time in select areas of certain counties, so that way people can just come and pick them up if they order them. So but in the meantime, if you have an urgent need and you're willing to come out to Berea, send us an email, and I can always make an arrangement and take some time for you, allow you guys to pick it up. So, but it is a beautiful sign. So we're really excited to have this. Any questions with regards to Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor? All right.
I do just have one comment, Jessica, from my
Yes.
pollinator steward certification class. They mentioned that having a sign in your yard is an extremely effective way of spreading the message, especially if that sign has a QR code.
Mhm.
Many people will see it, they'll look at it, and they'll snap that QR code. And they may not do anything that year. You know, they may just kind of keep on going, but it plants the idea. You know, where I live in Lakewood, people walk past my house all the time. It is a crowded suburb, and I see people stop and look at my signs. I don't have them out there to toot my horn, right? I just, and it really is an effective, low stress, low aggression kind of way. Sometimes you can pound people over the head with, you know, don't do this, don't do that, when sometimes just having a sign in your nice, pretty yard with lots of bees and birds is a really excellent way of getting that word out.
Well said, Betsy. It's also a great excuse when it's a dirt patch and you're still playing with your garden.
Yep.
So it's sort of like a mind our mess or mind, dirt patches. It's a work in progress. So thank you for that. All right. So next, so some of our volunteer opportunities. So as I mentioned, we are almost at 150 members. We have well over 1,000 followers on some of the social media channels, some of them over 2,000. So obviously we are growing just our local chapter so much. And as a part of the effort, we are all volunteers. So if you are interested in volunteering, there's so many different ways that you can help us. Some of the positions we're about to list and talk about a little bit, but even if one of these don't interest you, or maybe it's not the best fit, please reach out to us. We can always find a place for you. So, and we always love to try to match up if something's a passion of yours or something you're already doing, because you never know where that'll take us. Maybe we're playing for this, but hey, if you have a passion for rescuing plants, like, hey, let's kick that type of stuff off sooner than later, or working with the cities and revising their codes. There's so many other ways that we can be volunteering. So some of the ones that we are looking for sooner than later is a communication chair. And this person will be vital to developing and executing a communication, whether this is through email or keeping in touch with our social media team and a few others, just to make sure our message is consistent, both internally and externally for the chapter. Another really important one is our events coordinator. So let me stop right here for a moment because I want to thank Diane. Diane has been Diane and Janice too, but Diane, especially most recently, is not only our treasurer, but she's also our volunteer coordinator. And as a part of that, especially this past weekend with the Cleveland Metro Parks and us being at 5 locations, plus Ray doing a 6, she's been instrumental in helping us keep some of these events and the volunteering piece all coordinated. So thank you so much for Diane. That was almost a miracle that we were able to pull that off. But we really would appreciate getting somebody else just to manage the events themselves and keeping that organized. So, not stretching our team as thin as it is today, because it's really important and it's so much easier when we all have a defined position to help carry out these goals of ours. So, next, so another good way to dip your toes into volunteering is through the administrative side of the house. So whether that's as for an assistant secretary, I know Janice has been wonderful, but we have a lot of meetings, right? So whether that's helping with meeting minutes, sending emails, assisting with chapter elections, or with our assistant membership chair. So Jane is another assistant membership chair, but now that we're getting so many members, but on top of that, people are joining the Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor. And so in this role, they reach out to prospective members, welcome new members, and initiate and maintain member interest through our survey and other means. So this is a really important role, especially in greeting and reaching out to new members. And another way is an assistant volunteer coordinator. So I just told you the miracle that Diane just pulled off, right? And in this role, you're helping assist in finding volunteers for chapter events, whether this is emails, phone calls, casual conversations, and communicating to the volunteers their roles and event details. Also ensuring that all supplies, tabling kit pieces arrives at the event, and assists in training new volunteers, particularly at tabling events. So for those that have not seen recently, we have now cute little tabling kits with 2 game options and buttons and pollinator antennas and stuff like that. So I know Diane was instrumental. So was Shelly and several others. So thank you guys all for that helped in partaking in pulling together those tabling kits. So they're very cute. And next, this is a newer position that we're looking for, but it is a community garden coordinator chair position. So obviously there are some of these community garden projects that we did last year, and we're dabbling into that a little bit this year, but we'd like to do more with that. So this position would help develop and maintain relationships with community partners for locations for new gardens. A perfect example of this, of one that we have talked about, would be Wendy Park. So as a part of efforts like this, or maybe a WAGR, helping organize installation and maintenance days that are needed, also communicating regularly with the garden volunteers and or leads, also act as a liaison between Wild Ones Greater Cleveland chapter and other organizations. In addition, when it's something that Wild Ones itself is trying to initiate versus the community coming to them, creating a business plan around it. So that way we could then apply for grants or work with these other communities to get that community project done. So, so if this is something that interests you, or you might know somebody that's interested in this, please share this information with them. And if you'd like to talk further, send us an email, like I said, at wildonesgreatercleveland@gmail.com. All right, so next, other volunteer opportunities. So one of the very important pieces, this is the blood of our organization, is doing our information tabling events. We are still a younger organization and a newer chapter to the area. And so when you ask that question, have you heard of Wild Ones? 80% of the time it's going to be, no, I have not. And so as a part of that, we are doing these tabling events at these wonderful events. So you can see a couple coming up in June. We have the Cleveland Heights Native Plant Sale in Cuyahoga County. We have Medina County Parks District Native Plant Sale, Medina, Blue Herring Homecoming at Summit, and the Sandstone Terrace Native Plant Sale, which we'll talk about in a moment, on 6/22. So if this is something that interests you in volunteering and helping us table for these events and starting to talk to the community about Wild Ones and about the importance of native plants, send us an email. We'll also be following up an email in the next day or two. So that way you guys can see all the dates and times for these events. And if you're interested, you can select on the survey, and we'll continue to follow up with you with regards to these events. All right, so recent events. So like I said, we've done several recently. This is that time of year where it's crazy, right around starting up with Earth Day to Arbor Day to the beginning of May, where all the plant sales are just starting. So we had 3 events on Earth Day itself, and then the following week we had a couple follow up as well. These are just a few photos. whether it's with this or some of these other activities, thank you guys so much. I know several of you on the call today were volunteers for these events, and this is a perfect example of what you'll see. And we appreciate everyone willing to help out with this. We also did 3 spring nature hikes. These are just a few photos from this, and I did not partake, but Diane, can you speak to anything about this?
Sure. I went to a couple of them, and first of all, I mean, just so much fun to do this when the ephemerals are first coming out. It gets your, native plant juices flowing. Gets you so excited to go ahead and get started with plantings. So, and then of course we have so many much about these individual plants and how they have evolved to how they are today. And so we were just super lucky to have some wonderful guides who took us on the trip. And we even had one person, I don't believe she was a member, but she went to all 3 events. So she was, I think, the only person who went to all 3 events. I'm not sure, but anyway, just amazing that we, had this outreach beyond just our members to, get exposed to these beautiful, beautiful plants that are right here in our own backyards.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Diane. So, and like I said, thank you to everyone that showed up for these. Also, a special thank you to several of the local metro parks. I know Medina took in this, Lorraine, and I believe Summit. So hopefully we'll continue to do this type of activity again. So, but this is one of our first spring ephemeral ones. So, and it looks like there's some beautiful photos that were taken out of this. So, all right. So as I mentioned, the 5 Cleveland Metro Park locations. Once again, few photos. I know this is not photos of everyone, but thank you guys again for those that took in this. It really does take a village to make that happen. And thank you again, Diane, for coordinating all of that. And look at our beautiful tabling kits. All right, next, upcoming events. So we have several still coming up in May, and then even more in June, but here are just a few that are coming up. So this Saturday we have the Summit Metro Parks. There's going to be a wide variety of native plant vendors, designers. We'll be there as well, so come say hi, but this is a great time of year to pick up some really cool plants. Even some rare plants that are hard to normally get. So definitely go check that out. In addition, Ray Stewart is going to be doing a virtual rain garden class this upcoming Tuesday, May 21st from 7 to 8 p.m. So we're really excited about that. Oops. And then Ray again, that following Saturday, May 25th, is going to be doing an in-person class at Don Mold's Plantation West in South Amherst. So definitely go check out whether it's his virtual class or his in-person class. Ray, is the in-person class on the rain garden or is it the importance of native plants? Ray, if you're talking on mute.
Yeah, all right. I think I unmuted myself. No, this will be on rain gardens.
Okay, that'll be on rain gardens too. Okay, so yeah, so you have 2 options then to go see the rain garden ones. So
In person or virtual. We
yes.
have both.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Ray. So Ray, if you haven't met Ray, Ray is very knowledgeable and partakes in the Wetlands Association and whatnot. So he has a beautiful rain garden in his yard as well. So he is definitely the go-to person to ask about that.
We might have to add that to the garden tours this summer.
Yes, yes, that would be a perfect example of a garden tour that most people would not normally be able to see, is the rain garden portion. So, yes. So also at the end of this month, we'll have a behind the scenes tour with Meadow City Nursery, and we'll have a social. So check us out on Friday, May 31st, and that'll be from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. So if you want to get your plant buying in, make sure you show up a little bit early. All right, so June, we have several events coming up in June. We're still finalizing a few things. Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, I think our next chapter meeting is on composting. Is that correct? Oh, okay, you're on mute, but I see it looks like you're shaking your head yes.
Yes, I'm trying to keep the dogs quiet.
No problem. So yes, so you know, we have the soil basics class today. Now we're going to do composting next. So really, you know, check in for that. I'm really excited because I've never composted before. But one of the other special events we'll have is seed packing. And we're also in the process of finalizing a few other events in June. So keep your eye out with regards to that. All right. So any question with regards to those updates before we jump into our discussion? All right. So our discussion this month is on No Mow May. And right, like when you guys probably heard about this, I don't know, it was like a decade or two ago. It was a really great campaign. And you know, it was about, you know, not mowing the month of May. But as many of us have learned over time, you know, it's not quite so simple. And so this discussion is about like the spirit of that mission and how it's changed over time and how we can still continue to keep to the spirit that and the goal of that original mission. So who would like to start? I think I heard somebody start to speak. Don't be shy, guys. Come off mute.
I always love to cut my grass, and I have to say that I've had to cut part of it, probably just because I live in the village. However, I've let parts of my yard go, and it's been kind of cool to watch what's going on. I I'm I've got 2 pollinator gardens going. I've actually been planting, so I have that going. But the parts of our yard, I'm just letting it go, and it's wonderful to watch. So I have more to do.
Don't
not
we all?
I was going to say more in terms of mowing to not do. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
No, thank you for sharing. Like I have to admit, I do not necessarily partake in the no mow way. I partake in or try to partake in low mow day or
Mhm.
May. So and a couple ways I do that personally is I try not to mow as often, right? Like I think there's that peer
Mhm.
pressure of at least once a week. I try to stretch it out to every 2 weeks around this time of year.
Mhm.
Part of that obviously depends on growth. But the other way I try to partake in this is I took up our traditional European grass in the one part of my side yard. And I can only do it so far because obviously it's a big undertaking and it's not a perfect endeavor. And from seed started native grasses, and there's a really great mixture offered by Prairie Moon and Prairie Moon Nursery, and I apologize, I'm forgetting the other one.
Ohio OPN, Ohio Prairie
OPN.
Nursery.
Oh no, I haven't done that one, but there's another one too. So
Okay.
either way, there's one that's called Lomo, and then the other one's called eco-friendly grass. And really, for the most part, they're the same thing. They're a mixture of native grasses, but they're the type that only grow for like traditionally, I think it's like more like 6 to 8 inches, maybe a little bit taller at tops, and that flops, and it has a really great root system, unlike the European turf grass, which is only goes like roughly 2 inches. And so, but it's native to our area. And so I converted over, but let's be honest, right? Like, even though I did that, you're still gonna get, the European grass that spread back into it, or get blown back into it, whether it's the weeds or other things. So, but I really do like it. And so I do find I do not have to mow that nearly as often, because for the most part, even though there's other grasses that have crept in there, for the most part, I can leave that alone if I want to. But I know it's also a matter of time because of all the European grass around it that it's just a matter of time before I do have to keep it up a little bit further. So what other stories do people have?
Well, I have a story. So I've been living in this same house here for over 30 years. And, so my neighbors know me, and they know that I've got rain gardens and pollinator gardens and that sort of thing. There's no pushback about any of that. But last year and this year, I've been really slowing down on my mowing regimen. So I let it get tall before I mow it again. And it's not every week, it may be once a month. And that's kind of been my policy for the last couple of years. Well, this year, I've been especially slow. And part of that's because I'm getting old and lazy. But, a lot of that is because I realized that, a low mow, a slowly mowed, a seldom mowed lawn is more healthy. And I really like seeing the violets doing their thing. I like seeing the clovers doing their thing in the lawn. And it's thick and it's healthy, and it's to my mind, it looks good. It's just tall and a little bit scruffy. Okay, so tall and scruffy, but it's not bad looking. But I kind of went a little bit long this year, and I've got great neighbors, and I heard through the grapevine and through the neighbors that I get to talk to once in a while, and they said, "Is Ray okay?" He hasn't been mowing. The lawn is getting kind of rough and scruffy. And their comment was, "Is Ray okay?" Oh, if he can't cut the grass, I'll come over and cut his grass for him. So if there's a problem, our neighbors will come together and we'll take care of the problem. And so I said, no, there's not a problem. And so, this came up 2 or 3 times in discussions with the folks across the street, who are wonderful neighbors, been here longer than me. and so I cut the grass. And so I went out and I set the mower up another level, so it was higher on the turf, but I got through the grass and it wasn't too haymaking. It was okay. And I went and I just celebrated with my neighbors. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm healthy. I'm doing this on purpose. And everybody's good with that. They just wanted to know if I was okay. And so we are. It's a great community. It's a great neighborhood. Good people. So that's my story. So yes, I'm getting scruffy, and I'm blaming it on age and laziness. But I'm letting it happen. And I recommend that everybody slow down their mowing regimen and raise the deck on their lawnmowers so that if it's not all the way up to the maximum height, it's near that. And let the turf grow taller than a well-mowed grass that is higher, not the 2 or 3 inches that some people recommend, but up to 4 inches is still a good manicured looking turf. Even at 4 inches, still looks good and is much more environmentally sound and lets those violets and the undergrowth perform and do the things they want to do too.
No, that's great, Ray. Thank you for that. And yes, we're glad you're okay. And we all know you're anything but lazy. If just your education schedule alone says that, and your volunteering that you do. So thank you for sharing. And I was curious if our guest speaker was still here, if they had any feedback on the turf grass mowing and what to do around this time of year. But I don't think she's here.
No.
I think she left. So any other stories or discussions or questions?
I just have one really quick thing I noticed this week. I was up at Maumee Bay State Park, and I don't know how they used to handle it up there. I've never been there before, but I noticed that they left a lot of their grass, I don't know, maybe at least 12 to 18 inches up, and then they just mow the edges. Now, those are huge swaths of land, but it looked so intentional and so nice when they go, 3 or 4 feet back that they actually mow. And then the rest is all this tall grass, and then I don't know if that deters people from walking on it, but they don't need to mow all those huge swaths of land. So good job to the Ohio State Parks for not mowing all that open land.
Yeah, that's great. Progress, not
There
perfection.
may be some pressure from the biggest week in American birding. I don't know. I'm just suspecting that
Could be.
the birders that really descend on Maumee Bay State Park
Sure.
at this time of year may have tipped the scale on that and said, hey, there's ground nesting birds that need that habitat, especially when you're talking about big swaths of land adjacent to golf courses and stuff like that, where if you can make the rough even rougher, even longer, then you got bobolinks, and other birds that are really cool that you wouldn't otherwise have.
True.
All right. So we are just about at time up. So please keep that conversation going amongst your friends and neighbors, because like I said, whether that's just raising, the deck on your mower and or like mowing just a little bit less, whether that's bi-weekly or monthly, there's just little ways to help with regards to that. So, but still try to, keeping with some of the goals of that mission, for No Mow. So calls to action this month. So if you haven't already, please take a moment, invite friends to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our team is doing a wonderful job on doing educational posts, videos, and other things along those lines on those channels. Also, if you're not already a member, please consider joining, becoming a member. Our members are, so important, are the heart of our organization. And it's through our members that we are able to keep doing these educational events and activities. Because other than membership, the only other way now to keep and allow us to keep doing these activities is through now the sign for the Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor. So, it's really important to support our mission, and we really appreciate those that are already members. But if you know about somebody that's interested, or you're considering joining, please consider joining us. Or if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And also, like I said, as of this past week, please consider joining the Northeast Ohio Habitat Corridor. It is free. So there's nothing to stop you from joining us. Take a few minutes. Please log in, put your garden. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could be a dirt patch. It could say garden in progress, whatever you want it to be. And then at one of our events, or if you're interested in picking up at an odd time and coming to Berea, we'd be happy for you to buy a sign. So any other questions, concerns from the team? All right, I take silences are good. Thank you guys so much for partaking in this. Thank you to all of our volunteers that make this happen.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will be seeing several of you at the upcoming events in the next month or so. All right, thanks guys.
Bye.
Hey,
Bye.
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 bye-bye.